Monitors hummed a steady, useless rhythm in the dim room. A two-star admiral stood by the bed, waiting for a miracle that 20 doctors said wasn't coming. He hired a nurse. He didn't know he'd actually hired a Tier 1 operator who refused to let his son fade away. Gravel crunched beneath the bald tires of Rachel's Honda as she pulled up to the wrought iron gates of the Hayes estate. The air outside was thick with coastal humidity. But the moment the heavy oak front door swung open, the climate shifted. It was 68 degrees inside, precision controlled. It smelled of lemon oil, old money, and the sharp, unmistakable sting of clinical-grade chlorhexidine. Admiral Thomas Hayes stood in the foyer. He wore pressed slacks and a button-down shirt tucked in so tight it looked uncomfortable. His posture was rigid, a man used to gravity obeying his commands, but his eyes gave him away. They were glassy, rimmed with red, exhausted by a war he couldn't shoot his way out of. "You're the new night rotation," Hayes said. It wasn't a question. His voice was gravelly, scraped raw from giving orders and swallowing grief. "Rachel," she replied, keeping her tone flat. She didn't offer her hand. People like Hayes didn't want handshakes from the help. They wanted compliance. She adjusted the collar of her stiff, cheap scrubs. They chafed against the faded scar on her clavicle. A parting gift from a jagged piece of shrapnel in a Syrian firefight 3 years ago. "I'll show you to the wing." He turned on his heel, his leather Oxfords clicking a sharp cadence on the hardwood floor. Rachel followed, her own footsteps completely silent. It was a habit she couldn't break, even in orthopedic nursing shoes. Before she was taking vitals in suburban mansions, she was an SOIDC, a Special Operations Independent Duty Corpsman attached to a Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The Navy's first female Tier 1 operator. She spent 5 years keeping men alive in the dirt, packing wounds in pitch-black helicopters, dragging heavy, bleeding operators out of kill zones. Now she flipped patients every 2 hours to prevent bed sores. It paid the rent. It kept her hidden from a military medical board that wanted to study her PTSD like a lab rat. They reached the end of the hallway. Hayes pushed open a heavy double door, and the illusion of a stately home vanished. The room was a high-tech tomb. The king-sized bed had been replaced by a Stryker medical frame. IV poles stood like chrome sentinels. A ventilator pushed air through corrugated plastic tubing with a rhythmic, mechanical sigh. In the center of it all was Liam. 3 months ago, he was climbing in Yosemite, Hayes said, staring at the wall above the bed rather than looking directly at his son. A fall, 60 feet, severe traumatic brain injury. The neurologists call it a persistent vegetative state. Rachel stepped closer. Liam didn't look like a climber anymore. He looked like a wax sculpture left near a radiator. His skin was translucent, tracing the pale blue veins underneath. The muscle atrophy was obvious in his shoulders and arms, his body slowly consuming itself in the absence of movement. His eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling, pupils fixed and unseeing. The day nurse, a 20-something woman named Chloe, hopped up from a chair in the corner. She smelled aggressively of vanilla body spray. "Hi, you must be Rachel. Vitals are stable. Heart rate holding at 62. He had a slight fever this morning, but I pushed some Tylenol through the peg tube and it broke." Chloe smiled, a bright, oblivious thing. "He's been a very good boy today." Rachel felt a cold spike of irritation in her chest. A very good boy. He wasn't a golden retriever. He was a 24-year-old man trapped in a broken meat sack. "I'll take it from here," Rachel said, dropping her canvas duffel bag onto the floor. Chloe gave a polite, tight-lipped nod, clearly put off by Rachel's lack of bedside warmth. She handed over the thick medical binder and hurried out of the room. Hayes lingered by the door. His jaw worked, muscles ticking under his skin. Just keep him clean, keep him comfortable. Understood, Rachel said. When the heavy door clicked shut, the silence rushed in, broken only by the hiss and click of the life support. Rachel stood at the foot of the bed. She didn't look at the charts. Civilian doctors wrote in passive terms. Monitor, observe, maintain. They treated vegetative patients like delicate porcelain waiting to shatter. Rachel walked around the bed. She placed her bare hand on Liam's forearm. His skin was cool, devoid of the radiant heat of an active metabolism. She pressed her thumb into his wrist, finding the pulse. It was there, slow, weak, complacent. He was drowning in the dark, and everyone in the house was just standing on the shore, watching him sink. By 2 a.m., the house was a crypt. Rachel sat in the corner chair, the blue light from the monitors casting long, distorted shadows across the sterile walls. Her joints ached. The quiet was driving her insane. In the teams, silence meant an ambush was coming. Here it just meant death was taking its time. She stood up and stretched, feeling the familiar pop in her lower back. She walked over to the bed and leaned over the rail. Liam's chest rose and fell in perfect, artificial time with the ventilator. Rachel reached out and peeled back his eyelids. Nothing. No resistance, no flutter. Just a blank, vacant stare. "You're in there, aren't you, kid?" she muttered, letting the eyelids close. In trauma medicine, especially on the battlefield, the brain is a liar. It shuts down to protect itself. It pulls the consciousness deep into the stem, cutting off the higher functions to preserve basic survival. Civilian doctors try to coax it back with classical music, familiar scents and gentle touches. They wait for the brain to feel safe. But operators know something different. Sometimes you don't wait for the brain to feel safe. You make it realize that staying asleep is more dangerous than waking up. Rachel had seen men rendered totally catatonic by blast waves. No physical brain damage, but their nervous systems had simply signed off. The medics used a tactical grounding technique. It was brutal, frowned upon in stateside hospitals, and highly effective. You overload the sensory pathways with a precise combination of pain, pressure, and aggressive auditory anchoring. You force the brainstem to panic, to kickstart the system, to break the baseline. She looked at the door. It was locked. Hayes was asleep in the opposite wing. Rachel stripped off her night trial gloves. She needed skin-to-skin contact for this. She lowered the bedrail with a metallic clack. "All right, Liam," she said, her voice dropping the soft, lilting cadence of a nurse and adopting the hard, flat bark of a petty officer. "Playtime is over." She leaned over him. She placed the knuckles of her right hand squarely in the center of his chest, right on the sternum. She placed her left hand behind his neck, her fingers digging deeply into the thick bundle of nerves and muscle at the base of his skull. The trapezius. She took a breath, letting her own heart rate slow, finding the clinical detachment she used to rely on when the world was exploding around her. Then she applied pressure. She ground her knuckles into his sternum, hard. It wasn't a gentle rub. It was a heavy, agonizing friction designed to light up the central nervous system. Simultaneously, she squeezed the trap muscle, pinching the nerves against the bone. She leaned down, her mouth an inch from his ear. She didn't whisper. She barked, sharp and percussive, hitting a specific rhythm. "Liam, break contact. Move." Nothing. The monitors didn't even blip. She kept the pressure on. Her knuckles dug deeper. The friction burned the skin of her own hand. It felt wrong. In a hospital setting, doing this to a fragile patient felt like assault. Doubt crept into her mind, a slimy, insidious feeling. He's not a shocked operator, Rachel. His brain is mush. You're torturing a corpse. She let go. Liam lay there, perfectly still. A red mark blossomed on his pale chest, where she had ground her knuckles. Rachel stepped back, running a trembling hand through her hair. She felt sick. The cynical part of her, the part that had survived the teams by assuming everyone was already dead, mocked her. "Stupid," she whispered, turning away to grab an alcohol swab from the cart. But as her hand closed around the foil packet, a sound stopped her. It wasn't the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. It was a wet, erratic hitch. Rachel snapped her head back toward the bed. The heart monitor, which had been painting a lazy, rolling hill at 60 beats per minute, suddenly jagged upward. 80, 95, 110. The ventilator alarm began to trill, a piercing, high-pitched scream. Pressure mismatch. Liam's chest wasn't moving in time with the machine anymore. He was fighting the tube. Rachel lunged for the bedside. Liam's face was no longer slack. His jaw was locked tight, the tendons in his neck standing out like steel cables. His eyes were wide open, pupils blown wide, darting erratically as they took in the blinding fluorescent lights. He wasn't seeing the room. He was seeing the trauma, the fall, the terror. He gurgled around the endotracheal tube, a terrible, desperate sound, his hands twitching, fingers curling into tight, white-knuckled fists. Rachel didn't hit the call button. She didn't panic. The cold calm of the battlefield washed over her. "Liam, look at me," she commanded, her voice cutting through the mechanical shrieking of the alarms. She grabbed his face, her thumbs pressing firmly into his cheeks, forcing his thrashing head to center. "Look at my eyes." His gaze was wild, bouncing off the ceiling, the machines, until it finally slammed into hers. He froze. The panic in his eyes was vivid, primal, and undeniably conscious. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. The double doors smashed open. Admiral Hayes stood in the doorway, his robe half-tied, a look of absolute terror on his face. He saw the red alarms flashing. He saw Rachel pinning his son's face, and he saw Liam fighting the restraints. "What the hell are you doing to him?" Hayes roared, charging into the room. Rachel didn't look up. She kept her eyes locked on Liam's, holding the chaotic storm of a waking brain entirely in her grip. "I'm doing my job, Admiral," she said coldly. "Now step back and let your son breathe." Hayes froze, his hand hovering inches from Rachel's shoulder. The sheer authority in her voice, a tone he usually directed at subordinates, short-circuited his rage for a fraction of a second. That second was all it took for him to actually look at the bed. Liam was choking. His chest heaved erratically, out of sync with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Saliva bubbled around the plastic bite block securing the endotracheal tube, but it was his eyes that anchored Hayes to the floor. They were wide, terrified, and tracking. They darted from the harsh fluorescent ceiling lights to Rachel's hands on his face, and finally, they landed on his father. Recognition flared, a raw, panicked recognition. "He's drowning on the tube," Rachel said, breaking the spell. Her voice was flat, clinical, entirely devoid of panic. "His brain is waking up, the gag reflex is returning. The machine is pushing air while he's trying to exhale, and it's panicking him. I need to bag him manually." She didn't wait for permission. Rachel reached over and silenced the shrieking ventilator alarm with a sharp jab of her thumb. The sudden quiet in the room was heavier than the noise. She disconnected the corrugated tubing from Liam's throat, grabbing the manual resuscitator bag resting on the cart. "Hold his shoulders," she ordered the Admiral. Hayes blinked. The two-star general reduced to a frightened bystander in his own home. "What?" "Hold his shoulders down firmly. Do not let him thrash, or he will tear his vocal cords on the plastic." Hayes stepped forward, his polished Oxfords slipping slightly on the pristine hardwood. He placed his large, trembling hands over his son's atrophied deltoids. He pressed down. Rachel attached the bag to the tube. "Breathe with me, Liam," she said, leaning close to his ear again. She squeezed the bag, forcing a breath into his lungs, watching the rise of his chest. "I am breathing for you. Do not fight me. You are safe. The fall is over." Liam's jaw clamped down. His eyes watered, tears leaking into his hairline. He was suffocating in his own terror, trapped in the memory of a 60-foot drop, unable to understand why there was plastic shoved down his trachea. Rachel squeezed the bag again. "In." She released it. "Out. Match my rhythm." Slowly, agonizingly, the violent spasms in Liam's chest began to subside. His lungs surrendered to the manual pressure she applied. The heart monitor, which had been painting an erratic, dangerous spike at 130 beats per minute, began to slope downward. Rachel glanced at the door. Chloe, the day nurse, was standing in the hallway, her hands clamped over her mouth, eyes wide with horror. "Call the neurologist," Rachel barked at her. "Tell him the patient has broken the vegetative baseline. We have returning motor function and pupillary tracking. Tell him to get his ass here with an extubation kit." Chloe turned and sprinted down the hall. Hayes stared down at his son. Liam's eyes were locked on his father's face, blinking slowly. The absolute void that had occupied the boy's gaze for 3 months was gone. There was pain there now, and confusion, and an overwhelming, crushing fatigue. "Liam," Hayes choked out, his voice cracking. He shifted his grip, sliding one hand up to cup the side of his son's head. "I'm here, son. I'm right here." Rachel kept pumping the bag. She felt a familiar, uncomfortable tightness in her chest. She hated this part. In the field, you save a life. You load them onto a bird, and you wipe the gore off your hands. You don't stick around for the tears. Intimacy with the victims was a liability. It made you soft. It made you hesitate the next time. She focused on the resistance of the rubber bag beneath her fingers. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. "What did you do?" Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look at her. "I gave his nervous system a reason to come online," Rachel replied, her tone deliberately sterile. "His doctors said to keep him calm. They said stimulation would cause intracranial pressure." "His doctors are used to dealing with fragile things," Rachel said, checking Liam's oxygen saturation on the monitor. It was holding at 96%. "Your son isn't fragile. He survived a 60-foot drop. His body is a tank. His brain was just hiding in the dark because no one dragged it into the light." 30 minutes later, the house was swarming with medical personnel. The on-call neurologist, a sharply dressed man named Dr. Aris, smelled of expensive cologne and interrupted sleep. He performed the extubation, pulling the long plastic tube from Liam's throat. It was an ugly, violent process. Liam gagged, coughed up thick yellow mucus, and retched violently onto the pristine white sheets. Rachel stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching the circus. She noted the way Dr. Aris patted himself on the back, murmuring about spontaneous neurological recovery and miraculous timing. He didn't ask Rachel what she had done. He didn't want to know. Civilian medicine loved a miracle. They hated a liability. Once Liam was stabilized, breathing on his own with only a nasal cannula providing supplemental oxygen. They sedated him lightly to prevent a panic attack. He drifted off to a natural sleep. Dr. Aris pulled Hayes into the hallway. Rachel stayed in the room, picking up the soiled sheets, her face an unreadable mask. "We need to monitor him closely, Admiral," she heard Dr. Aris saying through the cracked door. "This is unprecedented. He has a long, incredibly difficult road ahead. He might not walk again. He might have severe cognitive deficits. We need a specialized team." When the doctors finally left, Hayes re-entered the room. The sterile tomb felt entirely different now. The mechanical hiss of the ventilator was gone, replaced by the soft, ragged sound of a young man breathing air into his own lungs. Hayes stopped a few feet from Rachel. He looked exhausted. The starch had gone out of his shirt, and his shoulders were slumped. "They want to move him to a specialized facility in Boston," Hayes said, staring at the floor. "Tomorrow." Rachel nodded, tossing a biohazard bag into the corner bin. "Standard operating procedure. They have the gear, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech pathologists." "I told them no." Rachel paused, her hand resting on the metal rim of the trash can. She looked up. Hayes met her eyes. The glassy grief was gone, replaced by the hard, calculating stare of a man who commanded fleets. 3 months. 3 months I listened to those experts. They played him Mozart and dabbed lavender oil on his wrists while he withered away into nothing. You were here for 2 hours, and you brought him back. "Admiral, I am not a physical therapist," Rachel said, her voice tightening. "I am a trauma specialist. I break things, and occasionally I patch them together just enough so they don't die on the way to a real doctor. I am not qualified for long-term TBI rehabilitation." "You're a Tier 1 operator, Petty Officer," Hayes said. Rachel stiffened. Her spine went rigid, the military muscle memory kicking in before her conscious mind could stop it. "Don't look so surprised," Hayes continued, stepping closer. "I ran a background check before I let you through my gates. I know about your service. I know about the Silver Star you earned in Aleppo. I know you were discharged because the medical board thought you were a liability after you beat a combat surgeon half to death for giving up on a wounded ranger." Rachel's jaw clenched. The memory tasted like copper and adrenaline. "He called a time of death while the kid still had a pulse. I corrected his assessment." Hayes actually smiled. It was a bleak, humorless expression, but it was real. "I need someone who doesn't give up. I need someone who understands that survival isn't a passive activity. I want you to stay. I will double whatever agency rate you're getting. You run his rehab, your way." Rachel looked at Liam. He looked frail, broken, a ghost of the athlete he used to be. The logical part of her brain screamed at her to grab her duffel bag and walk out the door. She was hiding from the war, from the noise, from the responsibility of keeping broken men alive. If she took this job, she was back in the dirt. She turned back to Hayes. "My way means he cries, Admiral. It means he bleeds, he throws up, and he hates me. And you have to stand there and watch it happen without interfering." "Understood," Hayes said. "I need a gate belt, parallel bars, and a supply of smelling salts. Cancel the vanilla body spray, nurse." 2 months passed. The 68-degree precision-controlled climate of the Hayes estate had been permanently shattered. The windows in Liam's room were thrown open daily, letting in the heavy, salt-laden coastal breeze. The sterile smell of chlorhexidine was replaced by the sharp, acidic scent of perspiration, tiger balm, and black coffee. Liam was sitting on the edge of the bed. He was drenched in sweat, his thin cotton t-shirt clinging to his ribs. He was panting, his chest heaving, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Again," Rachel said. She was sitting in a folding chair 3 feet away, a clipboard resting on her knees. "I can't," Liam gasped. His speech was slurred, the consonants thick and clumsy due to the neurological damage. It sounded like he had a mouthful of marbles. "I didn't ask if you could. I said, again." "Go to hell, Rachel." "I've been. It's boring." "Stand up, Liam." In the corner of the room, standing completely still, was Admiral Hayes. He gripped a ceramic coffee mug so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't said a word in an hour. He was honoring the terms of their agreement, but it was tearing him apart. Liam glared at Rachel. The right side of his face drooped slightly, a lingering shadow of the brain trauma. His hands were gripping the metal bed rails. His arms were shaking, the muscles screaming in protest. "I said," Liam forced the words out, a string of saliva breaking over his bottom lip. "I can not do it." Rachel stood up. She dropped the clipboard on the chair. She walked over to him, her footsteps silent on the hardwood. She stopped inches from his face, invading his space, radiating an aggressive, unyielding energy. "You climbed El Capitan without ropes, Liam," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You pulled your own body weight up 3,000 feet of sheer granite because you liked the view. Now you're telling me you can't stand up in your own bedroom? You're pathetic." Hayes took a sharp breath in the corner, a warning sound. Rachel ignored him. Liam's eyes narrowed. The rage boiled over, overriding the neurological stutter in his brain. He hated her. He hated her cold eyes, her complete lack of sympathy, the way she never helped him when he fell unless he was about to crack his skull. He let go of the rails. He planted his bare feet on the floor. He leaned forward, digging his heels into the wood, and pushed. His legs wobbled violently, his knees knocked together. The neural pathways from his brain to his muscles were like frayed wires, sparking and misfiring. He pitched forward, gravity instantly claiming victory over his weakened frame. Rachel didn't reach out to catch him. Instead, she slapped her hand flat against his chest, right on the sternum, catching his momentum and shoving him backward. Liam stumbled back, his calves hitting the edge of the bed, and collapsed onto the mattress with a heavy thud. He let out a ragged cry of frustration, burying his face in his hands. "You pushed me," he yelled, his voice muffled by his fingers. "I corrected your balance," Rachel countered, stepping back. "Your center of gravity was too far forward. If I hadn't pushed you, you would have eaten the floorboard. Stop relying on momentum. Use your core, again." "Take a break, Rachel," Hayes finally spoke, his gravelly voice tight with suppressed emotion. "He's exhausted." Rachel didn't look at the Admiral. "Pain is a data point, Admiral. It just tells you the engine is running. He doesn't need a break. He needs to stand." Liam slowly lowered his hands. His chest was heaving. He looked at his father, silently begging for a reprieve. Hayes looked away, staring out the open window. It was the hardest thing the old man had ever done, abandoning his son to the crucible. Liam turned his gaze back to Rachel. She was just standing there, an immovable object. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't pitying him. She was simply waiting for him to do his job. Something shifted in Liam's eyes. The frantic, desperate anger settled into a cold, dark resolve. It was a look Rachel recognized intimately. It was the look of a man who realized no one was coming to save him. Liam shifted his weight. He placed his feet shoulder-width apart. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath, filling his lungs with the salty ocean air. He opened his eyes, He didn't look at his shaking hands or his atrophied legs. He locked his eyes on Rachel's chest. He pushed. The tremors started immediately. His right knee buckled inwards. "Hold it," Rachel commanded, her voice cracking like a whip. "Lock the joint. Drive through the heel." Liam gritted his teeth. A harsh, guttural sound escaped his throat. He forced the knee back into alignment. He pushed higher. His glutes fired, his core tightened. Inch by agonizing inch, he rose from the mattress. He didn't pitch forward this time. He kept his spine straight. The shaking was violent, his entire body vibrating as the damaged nervous system struggled to manage the load. But he kept rising, until finally his knees locked, his hips extended. Liam stood. He was swaying slightly, like a young tree in a high wind, but he was vertical. He wasn't holding the rails. He wasn't leaning on the bed. Silence descended on the room, save for the ragged sound of Liam's breathing. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't clap. She pulled a small silver stopwatch from her scrub pocket and clicked the button. 10 seconds, she said, her voice returning to its normal, flat cadence. Hold it for 10 seconds, and you earn a shower. Screw you, Liam panted, a defiant, crooked grin breaking across his exhausted face. In the corner, Admiral Hayes pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth. A single tear leaked from his eye, tracking down the deep grooves of his weathered face. He didn't wipe it away. Rachel watched the second hand tick down. She saw the sweat dripping from Liam's chin, smelled the sharp odor of his exertion, and felt the heavy, undeniable weight of victory in the room. She wasn't in Syria anymore. There were no incoming mortars, no medevac birds waiting in the dark. But as the stopwatch hit 10 seconds, Rachel felt a familiar, quiet peace settle in her chest. She had pulled a man out of the dark, and this time he was standing on his own. "Time," Rachel said, clicking the watch. "Sit down before you fall down, kid." Did Rachel's unorthodox methods keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this intense, grounded story of survival and grit, hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a real fighter. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping, military-inspired medical dramas and untold stories of resilience. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Rachel's shoes? Your support helps us bring more incredible tales to life. Stay strong and subscribe now.